Hi everybody, I'm Catherine Grinyer, a director at Attendable, and today I'm here with the fabulous Orla Pearson from MyClearText and AccessLoop. Orla, can you just briefly introduce yourself for those that don't know you?
Yeah, no problem. My name's Orla Pearson, obviously, and I run a company called MyClearText, MCT, which provides live captioning, sometimes sign language, post-production captions for anyone and everything. I also am a founder director of a company called AccessLoop, which is a tool that allows you to add accessibility to virtual and live streamed events and in hybrid events easily.
Great, thanks, Orla. So tell us a bit more about MyClearText and perhaps also how AccessLoop came about, because it's a really fantastic story and I think everybody would love to hear it.
Yeah, MyClearText came as a result. I spent 15 years at the BBC. I was part of the team that really developed broadcast captioning in the UK. So there was only a tiny percentage of that being done when I joined the BBC. And I was part of the captioning team, but also the management team that really came from the viewer perspective about what you need when you're watching captions. What's the best thing to give people when they're watching captions? And it isn't always every single word and clearing of the throat, etc. So I came out of the BBC and thought I'd see what else was out there. And I did some freelance work, and I was really shocked by the way that captions were being delivered, but also the experience for the viewer, because I had that viewer experience just really drilled into my head from my time at the BBC. There was very little tech happening. It was on a screen inside of the room. At one point, there was people looking ahead and there was a screen here. So people who were using the captions had to sit like that while the speakers were there, which I found absolutely outrageous, but no one seemed to think was a problem. As a captioner, no one was giving me any information. So obviously the captions weren't as high quality as they could have been. And I just decided with my business partner, Elaine McCarthy, that we would then start a company, but we'd really concentrate on that kind of two things. So really developing technical delivery, but also educating clients around what was good for their event or their situation and becoming real experts in that. And then also supporting the captioners whose technical experience was varied. So you were dependent on the captioner's technical experience, whether or not your event would happen. So we decided to take that piece of work on for ourselves as well. So, and I think we've really positioned ourselves as the kind of real technical experts. We can pretty much put captioning on anything, anywhere, anytime. And, the captioners are really confident to work with us. We have a pool of 60. And AccessLoop came around because before COVID, it was quite frustrating trying to get captions onto things, but it wasn't such a big deal. When we went into lockdown, everything was virtual, every single thing. And all these platforms like StreamYard, which is a streaming platform, not a watching platform, Hopin, all sorts of Event Air, all these platforms came in. Not one accessibility feature to be found. When I approached them, they were like, that's not our job. That's not what we do. Or they'd say to me, we've got AI captions. And I'm like, that's not what my customers want and isn't particularly around accessibility. It's somewhere in the middle. And I was talking to technical people and they only could give me technical solutions without any kind of thought about what was needed. So I thought, you know what, we're actually the best people to develop this because I have 30 years experience in delivering captioning and in accessibility. And I just thought, we have the expertise here. We just need to find someone to build this. And I think we could build something that brings together both production and accessibility into something that's really useful.
At Attendable, we're huge fans of AccessLoop and indeed MyClearText and the technical expertise and experience you bring to live events. And we were supremely excited when AccessLoop launched on the market. We really admired how the journey you'd gone on in developing the product, and that you consulted not only with the end users and the users of the platform, but also people like us at Attendable, the event organisers that would be, bringing AccessLoop into the workflow. But I know that it wasn't easy, and setting up any new product or platform or business is not easy. So what was the biggest challenge you think you had to overcome in developing AccessLoop?
Challenge in developing any piece of software is funding. We applied for lots of government funding all around D&I, but we were rejected. They loved our product, but we weren't ticking the boxes because we didn't have the experience in funding applications, which I think is a real issue, because that's the barrier. And if you don't have that, then you have to pay for someone to do that, which is more funding. So that was a big problem. MyClearText stepped in and offered to support and fund AccessLoop. If we had known then what the eventual cost had been, I'm not sure how quick we would have stepped forward. But we really believe in the product. We really believe it's necessary, and it's necessary to be there because there's no other accessibility platform or tool within the market. That was a huge issue. Also, being able to translate what is a very niche but essential market and essential service and delivery to developers. Anyone developing any kind of software knows that that's the problem. Is it's like translating into another language and making sure you get all the nuance and every single bit of the flavor in. So we spent a lot of time with the company that developed it with us, and we were very lucky. They really got really interested in the platform and really committed to it, and they loved it, and they worked really, really hard with us. And I think further development is a huge problem as well, because it all costs money. And we're in the very great position now where we've moved away from our software company that built the platform, and we actually have our own in-house developer at the minute. And that's been fantastic because it allows us to really quickly deal with issues and stabilize bits that weren't working so well and actually develop new features, which is really exciting. And I'm really excited about the future.
Yeah, and that sounds absolutely fantastic. So you touched a bit about what AccessLoop does. Can you tell us why that's important? So why, we hear a lot about inclusion and diversity and inclusion and equality and all the sort of jargon and buzzwords around it. But why does inclusion matter, Orla?
I think it's really simple for me. And, I started off as a captioner, not really thinking about inclusion. It was a job, and it's become a real passion of mine because I think inclusion matters because nobody likes feeling left out. And I think that most people at some point in their life have felt left out, and it's never pleasant. And if you think about being left out of every meeting, every conversation, the transport system, every event you've gone to at work, that's why inclusion matters, because so many people's experience of work, of just getting out the door and getting to the shop, is being excluded and not included. And, that's why it really, really, really matters. And when people are feeling included, you get the best out of them. So when someone feels included in your family, you get a great family member, you get a lot of fun, and you get a lot of closeness, friendships, but importantly, workplaces and events. You're going to get the best out of people if you show that you want to even include them, even if you don't cover all the bases, but that you have a desire to include them. You get so much back. And, as a business, if you are inclusive, you're sending a message to all of your employees that you can be included here, that nobody is left out. And that will bring forth from your work, your employees, real authenticity of who they really are, because it's a safe place. And, the fact that no one is left out should be at the very heart of every D&I strategy, really. I mean, there's so much more and all the details, but that's really it, isn't it? Don't leave me out.
Absolutely. I mean, I obviously couldn't agree more. And I think everyone benefits when organizations are more inclusive, and every aspect of the business benefits. So, why wouldn't you?
Why wouldn't you? We always say that, Catherine. Why wouldn't you?
I know, we do. Why wouldn't you do it? So, there's so much scope for what AccessLoop can do. But there's still, live streaming is still very much in its infancy. So what's next in terms of your focus in improving the kind of offering for AccessLoop, the inclusion of live streaming? What's on your roadmap?
Well, we already can provide captions in the room and the live stream at the same time. There's function within the tool to do that. But also what we're seeing, and I think you've seen this as well, is a massive increase in the demand for accessibility. And that, is captioning, but it's also sign language interpreters who tend to work on site more, which I know from my business, we work exclusively remotely because it allows me to draw from pools that are not London centric. They can be all over the world. And that means I can meet the demand for accessibility. With sign language interpreting, it seems to have gone right back on site. And it means that we are having to say no when people come in with requests, which I hate saying no to accessibility. So we're developing a feature within AccessLoop where we can have the sign language interpreters join online, but then we can pull that feed out and put it on a screen within the room. So you can have hybrid. So basically, if people in Scotland are not so busy as they are in London, we can use interpreters in Scotland to provide in London, and that means accessibility happens. And a recent example of that was the BDF recent conference. Nobody could find interpreters, but there was eventually found 2 remote interpreters, and we were part of that team, and we did it manually, but it really made us think, right, let's develop this so you can do it easily, everybody joining, let's do the changeovers really easy, which are brilliant in AccessLoop, and then we can do a fully hybrid and in-person events. We're also looking for more edge cases, so visually impaired people who would like to have audio description. And that's been something that we've been talking to some really big kind of big theatres and big event spaces who are really wanting that, because in the theatre it's actually quite an important access for visually impaired people who want to go to the theatre. So we're looking to bring that into AccessLoop. So there will be, if you're live streaming, or again, having a remote audio describer, sending that into the room as well. So we're really trying to broaden out what it does. It started as a virtual events tool, but we want to broaden it out for a tool that can be used anywhere. We have so many plans. I'm telling you now, it's scary how many plans we have. We're also looking to develop the very first accessible player where you can have, you can have audio description, captions, sign language interpretation, and you can turn on and off, and multi-language translations, and you can turn every element off and select the ones that you want. So if people have multiple things they want to use, they can have them all on, or just 2 on, or 1 on.
Well, that will literally fly off the shelves because we get asked all the time for the opportunity. So it's an interesting dialogue you get into when we talk to clients that are putting on events, and they want to have they have a commitment to making their event accessible, and they want to have captions, and they want to have sign language interpretation. Sometimes both, sometimes one or the other. But they also get quite anxious about some people not wanting to see the captions. And there are also some user cases where people find the captions distracting, or they prefer to have their own version on their own device that's perhaps they prefer AI captions, or they prefer live captions. And so, we get caught up in that conversation around, we can show this, and actually we think it's more inclusive to show everybody everything, but we recognize that some people want to choose. And I think that the sort of individualization or the customization of the experience is actually getting us closer towards real inclusion, because I can then decide I want to have the captions on, or I want to watch the sign language interpretation, or I want to see it translated into French or German, or whatever language my choice is. So the accessible media player sounds absolutely fantastic. And
you are first on my list for a demo, Catherine.
Yeah, definitely. I will be first in line for a demo, that's for sure. Yeah, that's great. I mean, all amazing plans, and I think it sounds like AccessLoop is going to become a one-stop shop for event accessibility or meeting accessibility. And that's,
that's great. That's our vision for it, because it's that lack of expertise and understanding that people just don't have, and to have it all in one place and it's simple to use and simple to deliver. That's always been our kind of mission statement. So there's no excuses, basically.
There isn't, but actually that brings me on to my next question, Orla, because when I think you did some research when you first launched, and you asked event organisers, were they routinely sort of asking delegates or speakers about accessibility, and a staggering 1 in 4 still aren't doing that. And I think actually in terms of people I think ask delegates, but very few speakers get asked. Why do you think that is, and what can we do to reach event organisers? And that's where Attendable comes in. But what can we do to kind of make that case so that it's on the radar of everybody that's putting an event together? Because I think the first stage is asking the question.
I think so. I think what I meet in my working day is people don't know the questions to ask. So we'll be talking about adding accessibility, and then they'll say, oh, maybe we should do everything. And I said, well, have you asked what people need? And they were like, oh, we don't know what to ask. I have spent quite a lot of time writing questions for events organisers to ask. But exactly. And, you're much more the wider expert than I am, but I have to fill that role right now. So I think companies or organisations like Valuable 500, where they're getting CEO level buy-in, but I think making sure that trickles down, that's the first step. But then that organisation has to make sure that really trickles down to the whole, and right down to the events. And I don't always think that trickles down to the events. But I think people really don't know the questions to ask. So common sense is really important. Would you like any adjustments? Is a very simple question to ask. It's not specific enough for me, but it's a very beginning question. Is there anything we can do to help you to engage or access the event? There's another same question, but much more open question. And I think one that I might respond to, because, well, actually, I like captions and I would like to have those, or I really would like a sign language interpreter, or could I have the slides in advance, because I can then look at those and know what to expect, so I can hold my focus and attention. Could you ask people to describe themselves to me? And I think what people see accessibility is this huge, big job. It's actually just 90% of the time thinking about people who might have another way of accessing the content. And I think, I spend a lot of time talking about captions, sign language, this, that. But then I also say, why don't you get your speakers to describe themselves and give their pronouns? And now you've covered another 10 groups. Or why don't you make the slides available? Because yes, people are visually impaired, and make sure they're all alt tagged and there's descriptions of things. That doesn't take up a huge amount of time, and it's not expensive. None of the things I'm talking about cost money. Yes, there are bigger things that cost money, but on the whole, it's common sense. And it's just asking, has somebody else got another requirement to access what I'm delivering?
Yeah, and then working out how that can be accommodated or facilitated. Yeah. And often it is, it's a different mindset. It's a different way of approaching the event and thinking about it. And we always say inclusion starts with intent. You have to want to do it. You have to want to be open and inclusive. And if you start with that premise, then things fall into place. But I'm going to ask you your thoughts on the cost of making things accessible, because I know this is something you and I talk about frequently. But we often get pushback from clients about the cost of making adjustments to an event, and what's your response to that when you get sort of pushback on the cost of those adjustments?
Well, some of the lovely ones I get asked, but there's only 2 people have requested it in the audience. There's only 2 people going to use these captions, and I'll say, well, there's a huge audience for captioning and live captioning, and it starts with deaf and hard of hearing people with hearing loss, but then it moves to, we get huge feedback from the neurodiverse audience, so people with ADHD, people with dyslexia, dyspraxia, autism. massive users of captions and captions, and actually choose events with live captions to go to over events that don't. Any global company will have people whose business language is English, but their second language is something else. Live captioning in the business language massively increases the engagement to do with that. So it's that thing of, it's probably 40 to 50% of your audience are going to be using those captions at some point throughout the day. And so it's not for two people, it's for half your audience. We had a brilliant experience with EY. We were working on an event with them, and I was chatting to the events organizer, and she was saying, we just don't get the engagement. We bring over the CEO and all these, but there's a lot of noise. People are looking at their phones. And I had noticed that the level of English, while English was being spoken, it was varied. There were some fantastic English speakers, and then there was some people who really struggled in English. We put the captions on, and it was like you could hear a pin drop. So they were really brave, EY. They put them right in the middle of this enormous screen.
Fantastic.
And it was fantastic. I enjoyed it. And she came running over to me afterwards. She said, that's the best we've ever had. It was the captions, wasn't it? And I was like, I think so. So, this idea that it's two people using it can really make a massive, massive, massive difference to your event.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, if you're new to offering accessibility adjustments in events, people start off and you get a few people asking, and the more you do it, the more people feel confident that they can ask, and they think it's okay. It's okay for me to ask this because it will be provided. Whereas they may have had wanted it before and it hasn't been provided, and that sort of thing. So I think the more you do it and the more you sort of lead by example, it becomes a routine that you can expect. What I really like is actually clients who set out from the start and say, we've made every attempt to make this event as accessible and inclusive as possible. We're offering the following things. So it could be captions, it could be BSL and captions, or whatever it is. And then they're saying, if you have any other additional requirements, let us know. So they're setting out a sort of level of accessibility and inclusion from the start of the event. So before you've even registered, that there's a good degree of inclusive thinking that's going on, and then you can make the adjustments. Yeah, the intent, absolutely. Yeah,
and I always used to no one would ever moan about the captions. It's when they weren't big enough. I love it because it's like you feel free to complain. Great, we'll take that down and do that. Another really good business case for as I think about it here, any company wanting to market to a new audience would have a huge budget to do that, right? They would bring in marketeers. There'd be teams devoted to this new audience that they want to attract to their product or company or recruit. And thousands would be spent on market research, on focus groups, on changing a product and changing the advertising in order to attract this new audience. Well, I've got a great solution to bringing in a new audience. Make your communications, your advertising, your company accessible, and you have a brand new audience at a fraction of the cost. So I think that's how people should be looking at accessibility is, I want to attract a new audience, and this is my diverse audience, and it is really cheap.
Comparatively. I think, absolutely. I think that's the way to look at it. It's about engaging, why are you putting on an event? It's to engage with people from either within your business or your consumers, your stakeholders, potential clients, potential employees. So why wouldn't you want to, broaden that out as much as possible and let as many people engage with you as possible?
And it's also, I think as well, there was reports from Sainsbury's. I was doing an event for them and I was listening, and they were saying, yes, we are making our stores accessible and that person who needs that accessibility. But what we found is all their family and friends and neighbours and everyone who knows them come to Sainsbury's because Sainsbury's are doing this for their friend, family member, and they appreciate it, and they come and patronize the business because of that. And, now we're talking about a massive new audience for your product, your company, that can't really be measured.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there is also more broadly a sort of demographic shift. I think, as younger people are entering the
Yes.
workforce and finishing their education, they've enjoyed perhaps a more inclusive educational experience where schools are getting better at offering different adjustments. And so they're arriving in the workplace and saying, well, hang on a minute, I had all this in place at school. I had all the tech and the software and the, whatever I needed. And why can't I have that here? And now I've arrived in the world of work, and I think you're getting that upwards push. As society sort of, moves forward and we're generally becoming more inclusive. And there are, younger generations just wouldn't tolerate it, having to sort of make do and mend as perhaps sort of older people have experienced in times gone by. So we're coming to the end of our chat. Time always flies by, Orla, when you and I catch up. Is there anything else you'd like to mention that we haven't covered?
I think we've covered quite a lot. As always, we put the worlds to right whenever we get together. I think people just really need to start getting some budget for accessibility and stop resenting that budget. This is a great thing to do for your employees, for your customers, for your attendees. You're making beautiful sets and fabulous videos. You can do this as well, and go to the suppliers, go to the experts, go to people like Attendable who will walk you through the whole process and really not just do your event, but educate you so you can be empowered to do your own events in the future. And I think companies need to be brave and, like you say, the younger generation is demanding inclusion. They are demanding it. So, if you want those young people as customers, as clients, as employees, you need to kind of think about this inclusion piece. And it doesn't have to just be captioning and sign language. There's a million things you can do to be inclusive. So start the journey today, because I do think there's a tsunami coming of demand for this. I've seen it begin.
Yeah, so, absolutely. Great. Orla, thanks so much. As ever, it's been a pleasure. And can't wait to hear and see the next steps for AccessLoop and of course MyClearText on the captions side of things. So thanks ever so much, Orla, and see you soon.
My absolute pleasure. Nothing I'd like to talk about more than this. So thanks for having me, and lovely to see you.